if you will.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you for welcoming me here today. So when Greg asked me to speak, he suggested that I choose a topic related to my research. But the thing is, I'm glad Beth isn't here today to hear me say this. I haven't done much research this past year. I haven't even thought about my research, but I have thought a lot about public health and about politics, as I'm sure everyone has. And so I want to share some things that I've been turning over in my mind that are a little bit related to COVID and politics and religion. I'm not an expert in any of these topics that I'm going to bring up, but I'm just want to suggest them for discussion. And, you know, Sherry doesn't know what I'm going to talk about, and I didn't know what meditation she was going to read, but she might have answered my questions in that meditation. So we might end up back where we started. I do promise not to talk a whole lot about death like last time, but I was realizing as she was reading the story, well, oops. But the story I chose because it highlights the kind of the sense of relief that we experience when we share our experience with others, and we have some kind of empathy from other people. Excuse my cattail. So let me start with the 19th century French sociologist, Emile Durkheim, who conceived of religion as inseparable from society. So Durkheim wrote that religion only comes about when people gather together in a group. So for Durkheim, if there's no group, there's no religion. And this is because Durkheim saw the origins of religion in what I think of as a feeling of excitement. Now, excitement and feeling weren't Durkheim's words. Durkheim's term in French was collective effervescence. And so when I hear collective effervescence, I get this image in my mind of a soft drink being poured into a glass and the bubbles kind of rising to the top. And I think this works for Durkheim's point that when humans get together in a group and all of our attention is focused on the same thing, and our bodies are kind of moving in the same way, maybe our voices are somewhat synchronized, that we get this kind of bubbly feeling, this kind of emotional excitement. And so this works if you think of like hippies dancing together at a Grateful Dead concert, or if you think of soldiers undergoing the routines of basic training, or if you think of a church with the congregates, you know, standing and sitting and singing or being silent all together, you know, in unison. When we do things like this, we feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, right? We feel like our world kind of expands, and we feel committed, if Durkheim is right, to the other people in the group. Right? Our willingness to sacrifice for the others around us is greater than just our ordinary, everyday feelings of altruism. So according to Durkheim, we really enjoy this experience, this feeling of collective effervescence. It feels really good. And so we want to appreciate and we want to celebrate this feeling, but we want to celebrate the source or the origin of this feeling. And so we don't recognize, at least according to Durkheim, that this feeling is coming from the group, from all of us gathered together. And we look for the source of this feeling outside of ourselves. And he says this is where we come up with the idea of gods or spirits or some kind of, you know, supernatural transcendental force. It's because we conclude that there must be something powerful out there that causes us to feel this way. And so to appreciate the source of our collective effervescence, this is how we come up with religion. So we're worshiping gods and spirits that we believe to exist somewhere separate from human society. But according to Durkheim, the real origin of our excitement lies in the group dynamic. And this gets us to Durkheim's famous statement that quote, "Religion is society worshiping itself." And I love to tell that to my intro students because it just completely shocks them. They're like, what? That is the worst thing I've ever heard. So Durkheim says that we think religion is worshiping something outside of ourselves, a kind of God, but the actual source of the feeling that we're trying to celebrate is actually our community, our society. So if Durkheim is right, we would expect a decline in church attendance during a pandemic when people are forced to stay home and log into a service via a computer. Because when we're on Zoom, we're not surrounded by other people. We don't all turn our heads at the same time to watch the kids run up to the front of the sanctuary or crawl or hop or whatever it is they feel like doing that day. But so regardless of our firm, belief and commitment to social distancing during COVID times, we kind of get it when we read about religious groups that are violating stay-at-home orders or that want some kind of exemption so they can gather in big groups, even when their legislators have said that don't do this. Because we just can't get that same feeling of collective effervescence when we are at home in front of our screens. And so there's a sense in which I think Durkheim is absolutely brilliant. But there's another part of me that thinks that he's just stating the obvious. Because, show me a religion, a religious tradition that doesn't recognize the importance of community. So in Buddhism, for example, they call it Sangha, is their word for community, and they make it one of the three jewels. So one of the three most important things in Buddhism. So the community is one of the three things in which a Buddhist is supposed to take refuge, where a Buddhist is supposed to turn and look for guidance and support. So, I said, show me a religion that doesn't recognize the importance of community. Last week I was teaching Taoism. So you might think, oh, Taoism, right? It's all about going by yourself to the mountains, leaving society behind. But even in Taoism, we make a distinction between what we call philosophical Taoism, which would be the leave it all behind, and religious Taoism, which is about, collective rituals and traditions. So this is the question that all of this leaves me with. If Durkheim is right, and quote, religion is a group of people coming together to celebrate their community, what is it that creates that community in the first place? So Durkheim was basing his theories on data that was provided by 19th century anthropologists who were working in the Australian outback and studying Aboriginal peoples. And so for these groups of people that he's reading about and thinking about, society was everybody. It was everybody that you knew. So when everybody gets together, that was your group. But obviously we're really different. In our 20th century globalized society, it's absolutely huge. And so we separate ourselves into groups and communities that we choose ourselves. So maybe they're chosen based on shared history or shared interests, shared values. They're not just given to us like the people that Durkheim is thinking about. So now when I ask my intro to religious studies students to define religion, it's one of my favorite things to do. One thing that they always mention is shared values. They talk about morals and ethics. But now in having us rethink what might be our common sense understanding of religion, like religion's about gods and spirits, I think Durkheim has kind of problematized this link between values and morals and religion, like what makes our values and morals religious versus not religious. And so where am I going with this? In my mind, I'm going to the UU parking lot here in Statesboro. And in my mind, when I arrive, I see so many Priuses, like way more Priuses than you would expect, given the demographics of Bullitt County. And then when I imagine walking in the door, I see myself being greeted by people who voted for Warnock and Ossoff and Biden, and who eat less meat and buy more organic food than the average Statesboro resident. Okay, then the service begins, and it's confirmed that I'm surrounded by people who support genderqueer and sexual minorities and who affirm the value of racial and cultural diversity. So are these commitments religious commitments, or are they social commitments, or are they political commitments? And what is the difference between one and the other? To what extent are religious communities sustained by shared theological views? And to what extent are they a place where politically like-minded individuals come together and find encouragement and support? So can, religious and political ideology really be separated? There was an article in The Atlantic, it was about a month ago, I think it was on March 10th. And the author links this decline that supposedly we've experienced in the US since, I think it was since about the 1970s. We've had a decline in what he calls overt religiosity. So fewer and fewer people are affiliating themselves with religious groups. And he says that as that religious affiliation has declined, we've seen an increase in the intensity of political connections and political identities and political ideologies. And so he makes the case that political commitments are replacing religious ones for lots of Americans. And so he writes, quote, "This is what religion without religion looks like." Or in other words, this is what it's like to be religious without being religious. So what is it to be religious, right? Is it about holding certain theological views? Or is it simply being committed to some kind of collective identity? Is it about feeling a sense of excitement when we're surrounded by like-minded people? Is there really some kind of difference between political beliefs and religious beliefs? And so that's the question I've been pondering, and I wish I could remember better Sherry's meditation, but I was nervous, so I was having trouble, and so maybe we can go back to that. But during this pandemic and this time of political chaos in our country, it's a question that I've been coming back to, and I think that a UU congregation is kind of the perfect place to ask this question, and it might be something that you all discuss on a regular basis, and you've thought a lot about. But so I'm deeply interested to hear what you have to say. It's more of instead of a talk, it's more of just throwing this out here to hear your views. And so thank you for having me here today.